Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Raw Men podcast. I'm your host, AronRa, and tonight we have a little bit different assembly. Rather than interviewing one person, we're going to be interviewing a handful of people, all who have different perspectives on what everybody's talking about this week. This is what I perceive as two problems that could be viewed separately, but the issue is where those two different problems overlap. One of them being the overt militarization of our police forces, and alternately the separate problem of the persistent racism evident throughout this country. And as I said, when those two elements overlap, we have some extreme drama. And I have some people here that are going to be talking about that this evening. Before we get into that, though, Mark, I understand you have some announcements for us.
Yes. First, I'd like to say thank you to all of our new Jurassic level premium subscribers. Thank you for supporting the show. I would like to remind everyone that the Jurassic subscriber setup is as such. Starting in January, we're going to be doing 30-minute after-show hangouts with the guests. So you'll be able to actually participate with Aaron and I and the guests from the show, and you'll only be able to get that information and how to get into that if you're a subscriber. Plus, you'll be added to the Facebook group. So it's $3.99 a month. It goes to helping Aaron and I promote the show. You can go to the website, thera-men.com, to find out how to sign up for that. Also, I will be in Greensboro, North Carolina this weekend for the second of the Common Ground Conversation series events. We'll be at the Greensboro Historical Museum on Saturday from 5 to 8:30. We're going to have Jerry DeWitt, who many of you know, and the Reverend Mark Sandlin, who is a progressive minister friend of mine, and we'll be talking about how the most progressive of Christians and the secular humanist groups can work together on things that they agree on, like separation of church and state, LGBT equality, women's reproductive rights. Ferguson, we'll probably talk about that. We'll be talking about the war on Christmas because this is the holiday edition of the show. So if you're in Greensboro, North Carolina, come out and see us. And as well, I wanted to bring up that this show is sponsored by Atheist Avengers. Go to atheisavengers.fm. It's a new atheist podcast featuring Jennifer Lovejoy and many others, and we appreciate their sponsorship. That's all I have at this point, Aaron. I'm excited to hear from the guests. Aaron is still muted. I could see him talking.
Yeah, this is how professional I get. All right, so Evette, let me see if I can remember this. I guess Evette Stanton, one of our guests this evening, is a St. Louis resident who grew up in Ferguson. She's a member of the Black Atheist Facebook group founded by her husband Mario, and she's here to provide insight on race relations in the St. Louis region from a black historical and secular perspective. Evette, if you would please, I'd like to hear from you first.
First, good evening, and thank you for having me. The first thing I want to mention is I think that people should have an understanding, if we're going to talk about Ferguson and what happened, people should have an understanding of the race relations in St. Louis, in the St. Louis region as a whole. It's more than Michael Brown. It's been long simmering beneath the surface. It was basically the straw that broke the camel's back. The dust that covered the line in the sand was removed last Monday, and a lot of us know where we stand if we were ambiguous about it before. It's very tense here. There's a lot of activity still. Even though you may not see things on the news, there has been nonstop protesting since August 10th. Not one day has gone where someone has not been actively protesting. So this is long overdue here. You know, something was going to happen, and the incident started with Michael Brown.
Mm-hmm. And I see that we've recently been joined also by Bria Crutchfield, president of Black Nonbelievers of Detroit. Bria, I'm sorry that we had to start the show before you got in here. Would you like to chime in for just a moment on what she just said? Are you able to hear us?
Welcome, Bria. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Hi, Evette.
Hi, Bria.
I don't think Bria was on to hear all of what Evette had said.
Okay.
Evette was detailing, Bria, how the race relations in St. Louis didn't, it didn't start with Michael Brown. That was just where the nation has become aware of it.
Okay.
And Evette, perhaps if you want, if Bria doesn't want to jump in yet, go ahead and continue with that if you've got any more.
That was pretty much it, just to kick things off. I think it's important to understand the context in which this is all happening.
Okay, so you said that these riots, or not riots, that these protests or demonstrations or what have you have been going on every single night since August, regardless whether they made the news or not.
Yes, in some way, shape, or form.
Okay, what have you seen of that yourself?
I've seen what is more remarkable to me is the commitment of the young people in this region. Specifically the young black people, but just young people in general. They're not letting it go. And I'm a little older. I have a lot more, going on and family and whatnot. But I support them wholeheartedly. They're the flame, and I'm going to keep fanning it.
Okay. And James, I understand you were there too. You were in Ferguson. Are you a Ferguson resident? How did you end up there?
So I am in St. Louis. I live in St. Louis now because I moved here at the end of June to work with the Ethical Society of St. Louis, which is a humanist congregation. It's a non-theistic congregation, sort of like it's difficult to describe. It's like a bunch of humanists get together every week to have services and do social action projects and things like that. And so as a representative of that community, I started working there very shortly after the shooting of Michael Brown, and essentially that has taken up a significant portion of my work since I got to St. Louis, organizing and acting around and with the protesters who have been working to make sure that that killing is not forgotten and that it leads to systemic changes in the criminal justice system so shootings like that don't happen again. And so since that time, I have been working alongside clergy coalitions as a representative of a humanist group and alongside youth activists and other activists in many different capacities, training activists with skills that I've got from my own past as an activist and as a teacher. I've been out on the streets marching in downtown St. Louis and in Ferguson itself. I have been to a number of instances of organized civil disobedience, so we've been blocking traffic. I was out last night in my own neighborhood, just a block or so away from where I live, blocking traffic with some young people. What we're trying to do is make everyday life sufficiently uncomfortable for people that they cannot help but face the injustice that has been in the system for many, many decades, but that most people don't see because they think it doesn't affect them. And so what I've seen, and I think this is a very important message for people listening around the country, and I don't know what the media reports have been outside of St. Louis, but I don't know that people are getting the message that this is a very well-organized, strategically sophisticated protest movement that is not going to stop. This is not a flash in the pan. What I've seen is that the young people who are organizing these protests, particularly young people of color, and I have to say I've seen so many young women of color taking leadership roles. It's been so amazing. They are gaining a sense of their own power as citizens, their own ability to shape the agenda and make change. And I think that when people start to feel their power to change things, that can be intoxicating, and they're not going to give that up now. They're going to keep doing this until they get the changes that they see. And for me, as a white man, as a gay man, as someone who's trying to be an ally to communities of color in this, it's been an extraordinary learning experience. And I would say, it's strange to use this word, but I'd say it's been a privilege to be here, to witness what's going on, and to be a participant in a small way with what's going on, because I genuinely believe that the next frontier of the civil rights struggle is happening in St. Louis and Ferguson right now.
Now, on that note, I want to refer back to Lalandra now, who hasn't said anything yet on the show today, but she was bringing me news about, you said it was an organized protest. She was bringing me news about other protests outside of Ferguson with other people that we know. Lalandra, could you fill in the audience on what you know about that?
I was even in Dallas, Texas, and Houston, all over the country. There have been smaller demonstrations in solidarity with Ferguson, and some of the other people in the free thinking community have been involved in it, like Zach Copeland. There's been like a grassroots uprising. Not necessarily violent or whatever, but you know what I mean.
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody seems to be outraged about it. I mean, rightfully so, whichever argument they have, whether it's the racism issue or whether it's the militarized police issue. You know, everybody's got a strong opinion on this, I think. Bria, we have not heard yet from you.
I thought that you were just filling me in as far as what Evette was saying, so I was giving her a chance to finish. No, you know, I met a young man earlier this year at an event, and I don't want to say to college because he came to me in confidentiality, but when this issue came up and the verdict had been said, he came to me and he's white, he came to me in my inbox and told me how outraged him and his fellow students were. And they protested. They had some people had a die-in, you know, they laid on the ground, others had their hands up. And his passion, first of all, I was shocked because here's this young teen, you know, like 18, 19 years old, white young man who didn't have to do anything, just could have stayed in his cocoon of a world and not give a damn. So his emotion conveyed through the inbox message, and I told him I was crying. He contacted me while I was at work, and I was crying because he did not have to care. We meet so many white atheists who say that they care. You know, they'll pat us on our head and, oh, I'm sorry, but they don't do anything. But, you know, I'm just piggybacking off of James's comment. It's white, it's black, there's all peoples of color, there's all genders, all orientations. We're just fucking sick and tired. We're tired. We're tired. I just read it, a headline where 2 white police officers went to this woman's house who made payment arrangements in Texas, who made payment arrangements on her traffic violation. She was paying her ticket. They went to her house and beat her up, a black woman. I mean, the police, the justice system has declared an assault on the black community. And what's so disheartening to me is our community, a secular community that's supposed to be so enlightened and so progressive, is anything but. Because I can't tell you how many black secularists, how many white secularists have had to purge their Facebook of the racism and the bigotry that has spewed forth on the timelines, on Twitter. It's absolutely disgusting. And I'm so upset I want to cry, but I refuse to let a tear drop and give the satisfaction to these racists. I absolutely fucking refuse. But yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, you know, as a long-haired young man, once upon a time, I had been profiled by police. When I lived in El Paso, Texas, for a time, they had some very abusive cops there. That several of them had been fired after an investigation by Internal Affairs, where some of these cops were actually picking up people, and rather than taking them to jail or to trial, they were taking them out into the desert and killing them and burying them.
Wow.
And this had actually been going on. It was a thing, and it was a prosecution. We're done. But I remember watching cops pull up when I would be in a safe position, perhaps. You know, I'm across the street. I'm off someplace where there's no light, so they can't see me watching on. But I remember watching these cops pull up, and there's a handful of teenagers come out of a convenience store, white kids, for so far as I could tell. But these cops brutally beat these kids who are very clearly teenagers, middle school, high school age, not big threatening people, and these cops were beating the hell out of them. I've been beat up by police. I know somebody that whose brother, white person, whose brother was arrested, and it did exactly the same thing as what they did in New York, where they put the chokehold on, and the guy repeatedly says, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe," and then he's dead. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I know that happens even when you're not black. Okay, so that's why I said it's two different problems, and the issue here that brings us all together on this is where those two problems overlap. I know even the people that are being racist in the comment sections, even they would complain about the militarized capacity of the police department. One of the things that disturbs me, separate from that issue, is especially living in Texas, and I understand that this goes on everywhere else in the country, but living in Texas, it becomes more obvious when you look at the demographics of how many or what percentage of the prison population is black versus the free roaming population. And when you consider that, in general, it would be more. I think statistically there's more whites smoking dope than blacks. So why do we have so many black? And why is it that we have such a disproportionate figures on the white cop who shoots a black guy and gets no indictment at all, but the black cop who hits a white person with a billy club and goes to prison? Mm-hmm. Or did I say that right? It was a black cop hit a white guy, yeah. So we're concerned about why it's so grossly disproportionate. And I had somebody send me a message today saying, does white privilege exist? And I'm thinking you don't have to look around very much to see that. And I know a lot of people of my color, in my age group, probably aren't aware of this. Maybe they don't think about it, but if you've looked around, it does become apparent that is actually a thing. And it's disturbing to me, the rates at which blacks are being prosecuted, the types of sentences that they're getting. It's not that it doesn't happen on relatively rare occasions to whites too. It's that it's so disproportionate against blacks that it can't be accidental.
Right. The problem that I notice, and it happens the same way with the not all men thing with feminism, and a lot of issues that come up like this, is the response being, one time this happened, so that's an example of there not being a problem. It's like with the joke of global warming, saying it's cold where I am today, so global warming doesn't exist. And that's the most infuriating part for me, is the outcry, and it constantly has been happening in the last, since Ferguson and before, that's the first thing that people go to, is the exceptions that may be different than the rule, without addressing the rule, which is the systemic, institutionalized racism that exists in the criminal justice system and in society in general.
Yeah, I don't know if we're all atheists in this group, and I don't know if you saw the thing that I think was on Fox News last week, where they were talking about atheists, that it's a political leftist thing, it is as if they think that all atheists are leftists. So I can just throw out that there's people like Penn Jillette out there. So there's one exception that throws that off. I recognize that there may be a tendency that way, but I can't dissuade the tendency. I can't destroy the tendency by showing the exception.
Right.
Well, and the biggest problem that I feel is not even that these incidents happen, because it's kind of expected, and certainly, as you say, it does happen to white people too. It's really that the lack of accountability happens more. Not only are we disproportionately getting affected by these incidents, but when they happen, there's just not the accountability. And what I've seen when people try to throw up these exceptions, I unfriended somebody a couple days ago, a guy I've known since grade school, that he posted a picture. It was 3 black men who apparently kidnapped and killed a police officer. Awful, terrible crime. And he said, well, and it says, well, where's the media outrage? And I said, well, there's none, because those 3 people are in custody.
Right.
And they're charged with a crime. So it wasn't, so the reason why we're upset about Michael Brown, it's not just that, okay, well, first off, he was unarmed, so, you know, that's one thing. But even beyond that, okay, if you want to say he did something, but the person who shot him, who, from all appearances, did something wrong, there's no accountability. Amadou Diallo shooting in New York City, 4 cops, you know, shoot an unarmed black man who was guilty of pulling out his wallet. 41 times.
Bullets.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
41
yeah.
times. Now, they did get charged. No one was convicted of anything wrong. You know, I was reading about this another shooting, Kenneth Chamberlain, a man who had problem with his life alert badge. The police came to his house. They menaced him for an hour, broke in and tased him, and then ultimately shot him and killed him. And no accountability, no charges. So it's not that I expect everything to be perfect, and it's going to happen. It's going to happen to poor white people especially. It's going to happen to black people in general. It's going to have to happen to everybody. But it's what happens when there's a problem. What does the system do about it? And what was so backbreaking about this Eric Garner thing is that here we had some clear evidence of a police officer overstepping his bounds. It's not that somebody said to me, well, it looked everything was normal because he was being arrested. He was resisting arrest. Well, right. The police are allowed to use force to subdue a subject, but if there is a limit, and they're only allowed to escalate if the suspect elevates. And he was putting his hands out in a defensive motion. How does that warrant being choked to death? And
well, I've watched that video too, and I understand your outrage on that, because the issue with that particular instance was that the chokehold that they used wasn't just something that coincidentally happened to kill him. It was something that was known to do that. This was an illegal move that had years ago been prohibited. So cops have been trained not to use this move. It is illegal to put somebody in a hold like this. And then when you're doing that at the same time as having 2 or 3 cops full body weight on top of somebody's back so that it's impossible to get a breath in, even if you weren't holding in a chokehold, it's stupid to me that somebody would perform an illegal move that results in a death of someone, regardless of their color, results in a death of someone, and there's no, as you put it, no accountability, that the cops just get to walk away with it. And I've seen a number of videos in preparation for this show where there's various instances brought up of the cops don't do a knock before they come in, they just bust in the door, right? Or if they try to bust in the front door and they can't get in, then somebody busts in the back door, and by that time, the person inside may have had a chance to get their gun, accidentally kill a cop. If you accidentally kill a cop, then you're sentenced to death. If the cop accidentally kills you, then the cop goes home, and there's no repercussions whatsoever. And he doesn't even have to apologize to your family.
Well, and especially too, the Garner thing comes on the heels. The decision is there was a shooting 2 weeks ago here in New York City where rookie cops were, in a rough neighborhood, and the guy heard a sound, he pulled his gun out, and then he fired indiscriminately and killed somebody, an innocent person who wasn't committing any crimes, and no charges.
No charges, just pull your gun out and shoot somebody. And I was thinking it was irresponsible once when I was a kid, and I was grabbed by the police, and one of the cops pulls out his gun and sticks it in my face. And I'm thinking how terribly irresponsible that is. You've got a whole bunch of cops holding me down, and I was just a skinny teenage boy. I can't be that much of a threat, with like 6 cops, right? Do you also have to have a gun in my face? I had guns at that time. I had some that has some very hair triggers. You wouldn't dare point at somebody because it would accidentally go off if you breathed wrong. So I'm very nervous that somebody's pointing a gun at me like that. Do police not get trained any better than that? Why is there no accountability? I have the same complaint that Bria does.
There's no accountability. You know why they can commence with the illegal chokehold? You know why they can just pile on top of a victim as if they're part of a WWF event? Because they know they won't be held accountable. I learned that through the young man who was shot 41 times, that you can be a police, especially a white police officer. And let me just say that because it's not the same if you're white or a police officer of color. As it was noted earlier, you're going to get charged. If I have free license to do what the hell I want to anybody I want, if I can walk around and just be this big ass bully because I was bullied on in high school or I was neglected at home and didn't get a hug, would I do the same thing? Probably. I hope I wouldn't. I hope I wouldn't abuse that power. I hope that I would literally live up to the protect and serve. And this isn't to denigrate those police officers who are doing a good job, who are upholding the oath that they've said. But we have to understand that this is, it's an endemic now. Every other day, someone of color is getting killed. Not beat up, they're dying. And these officers can't even get to the point of being indicted. Aiyana Jones, 7 years old, and they were filming in Detroit the first 40 hours, and the police blew her head off. He got indicted, but he didn't get charged. They televised this trial, and the grandmother, everybody who watched this grandmother pour her heart out, and how she described looking at her granddaughter and her face blown off. We all were in tears, and she spoke directly to that officer and said, why? And he just sat stone-faced, and he walked a free man. He's a free man. How many times do we have to hear these stories? How many times must we be upset before something happens? How many times? Before the black community, the brown community says, fucking enough. And then we get questioned because we're angry.
Yeah, and going back to my own personal anecdotal experience, I remember, well, not my own personal, in this case it's broader news, but it goes back to several decades now. When I mentioned that there was this problem in El Paso with the police department, they had internal affairs set up some cameras inside the police department, inside their own police department, that the police department didn't realize were actually surveillance cameras for a different organization. And then an undercover internal affairs agent got arrested. He got beat up in the police station on camera, and all of those cops that were involved were allowed it to happen. They were all arrested. But this was like 30 years ago or more. So, I mean, it's obviously a very different time that we're living in now, because back then, 30, 35 years ago, the police departments didn't have tanks.
Right.
And you could easily distinguish a cop from a paratrooper or military official.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Aaron. And like you were saying before, we clearly have two issues. We have the ongoing and systematic racism that is inherent in not only the criminal justice system, because you've got examples of the kids in Florida that did nearly the same wrestling move. They were like 12 years old. The white one killed the kid with the wrestling move, and then a little bit later, a black kid killed him, and the black kid was in jail for the rest of his life, and the white kid didn't get anything. I mean, that's an example, but that's one side of the problem. The other side of the problem, like you said, is the militarization of the police force, and what that does. I mean, they've had proof in the Stanford prison study in the I think it was in the 80s, 70s or in the 80s, where they just putting on the uniform of someone with authority changed these students that were on the guard side and made them mistreat the people that were on the prisoner side. And if you go from police officers wearing police uniforms, which is one very heavy level of responsibility, and then you move them up to a paramilitary uniform, that can have a psychological effect. And I think it not only has a psychological effect on the police, but it has a psychological effect on the people in the community. So the more and more you enhance the paramilitary styling of the police force, the more issues you're going to have like this.
And you know what? You're right. It does have a psychological effect. I am 46 years old. I'll be 50 sooner than I'll be 40, okay? But my driver's license is good. My car insurance, can you hear me? Okay, my driver's license is good, but you better believe I also work for a Forbes 100 telecommunications company. Okay, but you better believe Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, if a police car pulls up behind me while I'm driving on my way home or I'm driving to whatever destination, my stomach muscles clench. Now I am legitimately on the road, but you better believe I am filled with mortal fear because what's going to happen, I might survive, but I know I'll be humiliated because what's going to happen, they're going to surround my goddamn car with 5 or 6 police officers. It's nigger night Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday without fail. If you drive down Michigan Avenue, if you drive down Telegraph Road, if you drive down certain suburban streets, you are going to be pulled over for no other reason than your goddamn color. Because when you run my license, you know I'm good. You know I'm straight. I get my license tag a month before my birthday before it expires. But I am still filled with fear as a middle-aged woman of what the possibilities I may incur if I'm pulled over by the damn police. So imagine being a young black male, which every time my son hits the car, I'm petrified.
Even as a middle-aged man, you know, I think about, you know, some of the stops that I've had, and I got pulled over for a headlight out. Okay, fair enough. It's a reasonable reason to pull somebody over. But I was in Toms River, New Jersey. It's a working class white community largely. Not a big fancy community. The cop pulls me over, and then I'm on a county road now. So this is a thoroughfare street. This is not in a neighborhood or anything. The cop asked me what I was doing in that neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to ask, did I drive into Soviet Russia or something? Because, you know, and then when I said that I knew somebody in the area that I was visiting, he demanded to know the address. I ultimately ended up giving him directions to the person's house because he didn't believe me that somehow that I would know somebody in this community. And it was, again, this was not some ritzy community. This is, you know, poor white folk. I got pulled over on the way to work on Route 9 in Marlboro for a taillight out, and the cop came up to my car. Well, actually, he followed me for 2 miles, and then he started to pull past me, and I thought he was going to leave me alone. And then when he came even with me, he looked in and saw me, and then he dropped back and pulled me over. So, you know, what does that tell you? And as he walked up to my vehicle, he came up with his hand on his gun with a snap-off. This is for a taillight out. And again, this was not in Newark, New Jersey, where I would expect that because it's a rough neighborhood. This is in Marlboro, New Jersey. This is suburbia, USA.
Mm-hmm.
I can say the same is happening here in St. Louis, particularly in the predominantly black municipalities in North St. Louis County, where a large percentage of their revenue comes from traffic violations. And then these are, you know, low to moderate income people for the most part that live here. And then if those traffic violations aren't taken care of, which they also make it difficult to do, then they issue felony warrants on those traffic violations. Felony warrants.
Right.
Okay? So you've created a system of perpetuating poverty, basically, because you're locking people up, you're separating families, and all you're doing is trying to generate money for your municipality. There are 80 municipalities, independent municipalities in St. Louis County, which is not even half the size of the Chicago metropolitan area.
One of the disturbing things that I happened across when I was preparing one of my presentations was 2 cops in the Ferguson area that had been suspended for inflammatory statements made in public. One of them, there was a video of him giving a presentation to somebody himself where he said that he had killed lots of people and that he was going to kill lots more. And another one who said that specifically in the instance of the protesters in Ferguson, he said we should have put them down like rabid dogs. So he's making a public statement that the police should have opened fire on the innocent crowd and killed everyone.
Darren Wilson himself came from another local municipality near Ferguson that had been disbanded just 2 to 3 years ago because of the corruption and racial profiling. All they were was relocated. There were no one was disciplined over anything. They were just relocated. And none of these police officers live in these communities. They live in the predominantly white southern suburbs of St. Louis metropolitan area. So they're not a part of this community. They just police the community. But I think the underlying issue that, you know, we have these two issues here. We're talking about militarization and we're talking about race relations. None of this is going to be resolved until mainstream America, and especially white liberals, recognize and acknowledge the fact that they have this subconscious fear of black people. Let's be honest about it. You know, when you look at me, you don't see yourself. You see the other. And that is causing the difference between somebody's life and death. The fact that you can't empathize because my skin is my sin. That's the old saying. My skin is my sin. You know, in your case, Aaron, you know, you could cut your hair shorter, you can look like a mainstream business type, cut your mustache or whatever, and you're probably good. You're probably not going to get the same questionable looks from police officers, but there's nothing we can do to mainstream it up, you know, to not be profiled in the manner that we are.
Yeah, and that's a valid point. When I was that age and when I was profiled, it was for an adopted appearance. You are completely correct there.
I wanted to make a point, Aaron.
Yes, please.
I think that's what the problem is that black Americans are being dehumanized. You're not giving them the same consideration you would somebody that you think you understand that's your own race. I was pulled over by a cop at a small town in Texas, and he ran my license, and he questioned me whether I had stolen somebody's identity because I have a white name, and I'm not worried about him hauling me out of the car and beating the shit out of me. You know, I'm just, you know, maybe he'll just be a jerk and then leave me alone. My son is half black, and he has autism, and so I supervise him a lot. He doesn't go outside a lot by himself, but if he were, I'd be afraid. Like, even if he took, like, a BB gun out with him to shoot with his friends, I'd be afraid that they wouldn't give him 10 seconds to put the BB gun down or make sure he understood what they were saying. They'd shoot him like they did to Mir Rice within 2 seconds without even giving him a chance to put the gun down, because because it's dehumanization. That's what the problem is. And after Darren Wilson was acquitted, my Facebook lights up with some of my white friends posting memes about black people looting. And I'm like, is that the takeaway that you took away from this incident? And I had to explain to all kinds of people that white people loot too, and over sporting events. But you think the message of the day is to scold black people for getting angry at a system that is not protecting them, that is killing them. And even Barack Obama said when he talked first about Ferguson, we have a rule of law and to stay calm. And I don't think violence is okay, but I totally understand if the system has let you down over and over and over again, just calmly sitting there while your children are being killed. It isn't something that some people are capable of doing, and understandably so, and they're understandably angry, and I think that some of my white friends need to try and think of their own children. So I explained to them something that happened to me. Two white kids were behind our house, and they shot out a glass window, and Arn was standing right there, and they were shooting at Arn, and the cops came, they lied about it. But when they came back, they were aiming the gun at the window again. If that cop had killed those children, I would have been horrified. Yeah, they were committing a crime. And white people who keep telling people that, well, they should have been following the law. They shouldn't have annoyed the cops. You would be horrified too if those children had been killed. And they weren't following the law, and they could have hurt someone. So extend the same courtesy, the same consideration to other human beings that you would extend to your own family. They are not. They are no way different from your own family because they're not the same race as you.
Right. So my stepson, as you mentioned, he's got both the problem that he's visibly black, has black ancestry, but also he has my problem in that he's got the long hair metal thing going too. That's the kind of music he likes, and so he would be profiled that way. He also has airsoft guns and BB guns that he enjoys. So if we were to take him anywhere, I mean, remember the story about the black guy who picks up the, I mean, you can be a white guy and carry an assault rifle into the grocery store and you're a good guy, but if you go into a Walmart and you're black and you go to buy a BB gun, they'll shoot you before you reach the cash register.
Yeah.
So I've got a son who is visibly black and has long hair and enjoys BB guns, and he's autistic, so he's not going to understand what the cops are talking about. And I've seen that cops will, as they showed on Bill Maher, the little old lady on the ground, the guy's beating her in the face, and she's an 80-year-old woman, another 80-year-old man who the police beat him up and tase him because he's deaf and he couldn't hear what they were saying to him. So if cops are this reactionary, and my son looks the way he does, both because of his adopted appearance and his genetic appearance, then he's in some serious trouble if we don't stand circle around him in those situations.
Well, last night I did a pretty long show with Landon Taylor, Rational Warrior, and he brought up the point of how what ends up happening is that they turn us into superhumans. No matter what we do, we're this big. Whether how small you are, you're this big giant monster that can destroy a whole town. And you think about Eric Garner. I've heard people say, well, he was a big guy, or he was resisting arrest. And I made the point that, well, Jared Lee Loughner, who shot Gabby Giffords and 18 other people, killed 6 of them, he was taken into custody. James Egan Holmes, who shot the Aurora shooter, shot 82 people, killed 12 of them. He was taken into custody. So okay, resisting arrest is a crime. Shooting 82 people, I would wager, is worse. So how can you take the guy in that shot 82 people and not the guy who was waving his hands at the cops to please don't arrest me?
They don't see human. They see color. They have been inculcated to shoot us at first sight. Tamir Rice is proof. 2 seconds. There's not much you can do in 2 seconds. But they're like a bull that sees red. When they see black, when they see brown, when they see yellow, it's a wrap. They have declared war upon the minorities. That's it. Whatever training they're getting, it's not the right training. And that egregious training that they're getting has become lawful because they're not being indicted. They're not being imprisoned.
Yeah, I agree. I want to just echo a couple of things that I've heard people say. I mean, talking as a white man now to other white people, the experiences that people of color on this call have been talking about are real. And you probably don't see them because you are not a person of color, but they are real. This sort of experience has never happened to me. When I engage with a police officer, they're usually very deferential because of how I dress and how I speak and how I conduct myself. They are, oh, how can we help you, sir? What can we do for you today? They're there to protect me, right? It's clear they're on my side. But that is not the case for everybody in our society. And over the past few months, working alongside activists here in St. Louis, I have heard countless stories like Bria and Evette have been talking to us about, stories which make it absolutely clear, if you're willing to listen to them, that many people of color live in a constant state of fear of the very forces which are supposed to protect them. And it's not just, I think, if I'm hearing what they're saying correctly, the fear that every incident is going to escalate into violence, because thank goodness not every single one does. But even if they don't escalate into violence, it's the continuous indignity of being treated as less than other people in small but significant ways over and over again every single day of their lives. And just to give you an example of this, I was on a call like this with students at Harvard, where I'm still a student myself, trying to finish my dissertation, and they had professors, people of color who were professors at Harvard, talking about how terrified they were for their kids whenever their kids might get into some sort of altercation with police. That tells you something, which is that it's not just about poverty, or it's not just about social class or how you act. It's about race and racism. And it's as clear as day if you're willing to listen to the experiences of people telling you what happens to them. So I want just to tell white people, believe it. It does happen.
Also,
yeah, sorry.
No, another thing that is the and Shannon Nebo, my wife, and an excellent blogger and person that really I learned a lot from. She put something out on Facebook the other day that really made a lot of sense to me, and she said, black people are afraid around the country for their children and their own safety in this environment that America has created, and white people are just afraid of being considered racist. So that's what white America has done. They've gone to social media and they've said, I don't see color, which makes me throw up when people say that, but they say things like, I don't see color, or they try to give examples of where there's a minor, where there's an incident that didn't go the way that the majority of them go, and they do that to try to prove in a weird way that they're not a part of the problem, but they are part of the fucking problem.
Right.
When you say that, you are just perpetuating more stereotypes, even if you don't think you are. I think that's a huge issue.
Well, I saw on one of the Facebook groups I'm in, somebody posted this meme, and it was about brought up the whole thing about playing the race card, and people reacted fairly negatively to it because as I said, to me, saying the term the race card is itself the race card. So basically, it's a way to shut down discussion. It's a way to say, I don't want you to talk about racial issues because they make me uncomfortable. You're playing the race card, and it's just a way to shut people up. So, so this person went on to say, well, black people have to not, live in the past, and we need to move on. And I said, she said, this is, don't get upset by history. And I said, I'd be thrilled if this was history. I said, this isn't history. This is now. This is still happening. I said, when we're not getting convicted disproportionately, we get charged more often, we get convicted more often, and we get sentenced more often for the same crimes. So when that stops happening, I'll be thrilled. Then it'll be history. Or when people with black-sounding names don't get discriminated against for housing or for job applications, which are statistics to prove that studies to prove that it happens. When that stops happening, this will be history. But we can't just wave it away just because it's uncomfortable. If you think black people and other minority people bringing up the racism and makes you uncomfortable, just imagine how it feels for us.
Yeah, just a constant state of paranoia, and you don't really realize that you're living in that state until you step off American soil. When I went to the Caribbean, I realized how much of a burden it was when it wasn't there.
Can you tell me more about that, please?
Are
you saying that the way that you're treated when you go to a foreign country, that you don't get this sense of differential treatment that you get in the United States? Absolutely.
My husband and I, for our honeymoon, we went to St. Martin in the Caribbean, and it's the island is split between the French and the Dutch. Basically, it's a black island, predominantly black people, and I first felt it when we were just driving around looking at the countryside, and I wasn't looking in the side view mirror as my husband was driving like I do at home. Just the constant state of alertness is stressful. Having to always be on your guard. And I didn't realize that we lived like that until I was in a place that I didn't have to do that. I didn't have to adjust myself. And as our week was coming to an end, we were trying to come up with ways not to come back.
Yeah. Now, see, somebody had mentioned earlier in the day about, you know, the atheist community being supposedly so progressive, and how it was disappointingly not. Well, I had the same feeling of being an American citizen. I did the very thing that you're talking about right now. I had been raised in a very redneck group where ours was the best race, ours is the best religion, this is the best state, ours is the best type of truck, of music, of whatever. It was extremely tribal. And so, of course, I often heard that this is the best damn country there is, and we were supposed to be the leaders of science, and we were supposed to be the leaders in everything, and we were supposed to be so terribly progressive. And then I start looking around at other countries, once, especially with the internet, and realizing how so we're not.
You know, just to add to what Evette said about going outside of the country, at the end of September, I spent 2 weeks in England. And so not only was the issue of, you know, obviously with the race issue, there's also the militarization. In 12 days, outside of the airport, I think we saw a police officer once. And I was in like 7 or 8 counties, and it's all in the southwest of England. At no time did I ever feel in danger on the street. At no time did I feel like I was being discriminated against. At no and it was really striking, because I remember one thing, and I was so at ease and realizing, wow, you know, if I was, there's certain spots, you know, even here in New Jersey, that if I actually, you know, as much as I'm afraid of the police, I'm glad they're there, because they're you know, it feels unsafe. But even then, they make me feel unsafe too. There was no police, and nothing bad was happening.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to weigh in very briefly on that and just say that I've had a similar experience, which actually was one of the things that enabled me to try and better understand racial injustice as a white person. I think this is one of the reasons why it's very difficult sometimes for white people who are not members of any minority to really grasp what's going on here. But I remember the first time I went to Provincetown after I came out of the closet, and the first time I was surrounded by a majority queer population, and the sense of psychological safety and the weight that is lifted off you when you suddenly don't have to look over your shoulder and think about how you're acting, how you're speaking, and your mannerisms, things like that, was extraordinary. And I didn't even realize that that weight was on me until it was lifted. And I remember very, very distinctly standing outside of this pizza place they have there with all these millions of gay and lesbian and trans people all around me, and thinking, wait a minute. If I feel like this here and feel differently when I'm around majority straight people, how do people of color feel when they're around mostly white people all the time? And that was a huge light bulb for me. I was like, oh my goodness, I've been so clueless about this. Because frankly, you know, I'm going to be honest, I'm not great at talking about race. It makes me uncomfortable too. I'm not good at talking about my whiteness. I say, whenever someone says, well, you white people, I still get that little reaction that I've tried to train myself not to get, which is like, well, I'm not a white person, I'm just a person, which is the manifestation of my privilege. But so I can see, I understand because I've gone through the process, that for many people it's difficult to see this. But what I don't get is how people allow their own discomfort to be more important than other people's lives. Like, your discomfort about coming out of your cocoon and realizing that everybody else's experience is not exactly the same as yours is a really minor thing compared to the fact that other people are being indiscriminately slaughtered on the streets of American cities. And the only other thing I want to say is about the police response, because we talked a bit about militarization of police. And what I have seen in St. Louis, I can only describe as the government declaring war on its own population. And that seems extreme, but that is what has happened in this city. You are seeing enormous mobilization of hundreds of police, National Guard, with armored vehicles with sniper rifles on top of them, the firing of chemical weapons and explosives all over the place. There's some evidence to suggest that some of the fires in some of the very small incidences of property destruction there have been were started actually by police explosives, like tear gas canisters being fired into buildings and things like that. Some of my friends were trapped in a building that was a designated sanctuary space when police officers surrounded it and fired tear gas inside of it, which is extraordinarily dangerous to do. And there was nothing going on in there which was remotely violent. And there's something I really want to stress, which is that a lot of people latch on to these very small, isolated incidences of property destruction, and they use that as an excuse to just like, well, the whole issue is moot now because there's been a couple of cars burnt and this store burned down, and now I don't have to think about anything else that the protesters are saying because that happened. That invalidates everything. That is bullshit. And it frustrates me because, yeah, I don't support property destruction, I don't support violence, but the endemic of police violence against people of color is the real issue here, and that is way, way worse than 100 cars being destroyed. And it really gives a sense of people's priorities about how much they care about the lives of people of color, that they latch on to the very few incidences of property destruction in order to give them an excuse not to address the issue.
James and Evette, are you aware of any measures that the police took before, when they knew that the verdict was going to come out, to, like, they could have blockaded a street where people were protesting, so that they could protest and not block traffic? Did they do anything to prevent issues of clashes with the authorities?
Here's my perspective on that, and James, being on the front lines, and may agree with me on this. For weeks leading up to the grand jury decision, we were told by Governor Jay Nixon about how prepared the St. Louis region was for whatever response of civil unrest that would take place at the time of the decision. Like, so we knew, because they were doing so much talking, we kind of knew as the days went on that it was coming. And they had they bragged about the police having 5,000 hours of training. They had additional funds provided by the federal government to provide overtime for neighboring municipalities to lend additional support to the Ferguson area. They talked about having, what was it, 700, 500, something, no, 1,200 National Guard troops available. When the decision was made last Monday, where was all that support? I didn't see it. I wasn't there firsthand. James could probably speak to that better than I can. But from my vantage point, I didn't see it. Why were those buildings on fire and just left to burn? Why were they allowed to rough up a police car and then set it on fire? All this is it makes my conspiratory antenna just go up. Like, you all are purposely creating an economic desert in this predominantly black section of town so you can have an excuse to further disenfranchise the people who live there.
And that does seem to be the case. We're coming up on the end of the show, and so I want to remind everybody about what James Croft had said earlier when he was talking about that this movement isn't going to go away, that they're struggling to get accountability on the part of police, both for the militarization and for being able to kill people without any kind of repercussions. And of course, we'd all like to see that where it's no longer differential toward black arrests being predominant and all of that. I'm going to include some links for anybody's relevant information in below this video. There's a video that I saw about the militarization of police departments and everything. I'm going to include that link. I will include any of y'all's links that you want to put in. Mark, do you have any closing statements for us?
I only have one statement, and that is unrelated to the conversation, but important to our listeners. They probably noticed that I've been loading up 30-minute chunks of the podcast-a-thon that I produced along with the people from Secular FM earlier in the spring, which some of these people on here were part of, Bria and James. And if you're listening, I'm going to keep loading them all up after the Dogma Debate one, December 6th. That's why I've been doing it, is so people will be able to get geared up for the Dogma Debate fundraiser, which is going to be happening starting Saturday to raise money for Foundation Beyond Belief. But I'm just going to keep loading them up afterwards, but I'm not going to get them all loaded up before the podcast-a-thon, which I'd hoped. So thank you for listening, and unless you have anything else, Aaron, we'll just close it out and tell everyone thanks for being on the show, and thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, exactly right. I wish that I could go on about this because, we've got so many people here, we've got so many opinions on this. However, I think for the most part we're in agreement. So I'm going to go ahead and close out the show. I want to thank all my guests for your participation. And once again, I'd like to remind everybody that this show is about activists that are actually making a difference. Anybody that is trying to fix things and might actually make a difference. So next week or next time, I've got another guest lined up who is an ex-Islamic apostate who was fighting for feminist issues in Kuwait, of all places. So I can't wait for that conversation. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and close out. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. I love your accent, James.